It was 11:51 p.m. when the air in the Vance boardroom turned to ice. My father, Robert Vance, was leaning over the obsidian table, his face a map of jagged, billionaire rage, as he roared at me to apologize to my brother Tyler's latest mistress, a woman whose only contribution to our $38 billion project was her expensive perfume and a talent for nodding. At 30 years old, with a doctorate in biotech and the entire architecture of Project Artemis in my head, I was being grounded like a disobedient child for pointing out a lethal error in Tyler's code. I looked at the $38 billion contract, saw the glitch that would eventually end their legacy, and didn't feel an ounce of heat. I simply closed my laptop and said, "I'll go now." Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The private elevator ride to the top floor of the Vance Tower takes exactly 42 seconds. It is a silent, high-speed ascent that usually feels like a victory lap, but tonight, the polished steel walls felt like the sides of a casket. When the doors hissed open, the Chicago penthouse greeted me with its usual clinical perfection, all floor-to-ceiling glass, white marble, and the kind of expensive furniture that is designed to be looked at, never touched. My father, Robert Vance, had spent 30 years building this fortress of glass and steel, and tonight, he had officially turned it into my cell. The soft click of the biometric lock engaging wasn't just a security measure, it was the sound of a father revoking his daughter's existence. I walked to the massive window overlooking the city, my heels clicking a lonely rhythm against the stone. Below me, Chicago was a constellation of lights I was no longer permitted to join. To the world, I was Mabel Vance, the fortunate daughter of a pharmaceutical titan, a woman who lived in the clouds. But inside these walls, I was a ghost. I was the spare daughter, the quiet one who was expected to wear the right dresses, smile for the right cameras, and eventually be traded away like a blue-chip stock to secure a strategic alliance. While my brother Tyler was being groomed for the throne, mirroring our father's every ruthless move, I was the one who was meant to stay in the shadows, polished and silent. They never saw the irony in it. They treated me like a decorative asset, an ornamental piece of the Vance collection, while I was the only one actually maintaining the machine. For a decade, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, paying the emotional and intellectual dividends they didn't even know were due. While Tyler was out making loud, expensive mistakes at $38 billion galas, I was in my lab, fixing the structural flaws in his reality. I was the one who pulled the 3-day shifts to fix the neural interface code he'd mangled, ensuring the Vance name didn't end up on a class action lawsuit. I looked at the reflection of the penthouse in the dark glass. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly hollow. Robert and Tyler loved the illusion of their own brilliance, an illusion I had meticulously maintained because I thought that's what love was, invisible labor. I realized now that my compassion had been a luxury they'd been overdrafting for years, and tonight, they had finally hit the limit. They thought they had grounded a disobedient girl, but they hadn't realized who they'd locked in with. Deep within the secure digital workspace I had built with my own monitored allowance, Ether was humming. Ether was my masterpiece, an intuitive AI partner that could see the patterns my father and brother were too arrogant to notice. It wasn't just code. It was the clean logic of a world where your last name didn't dictate the truth. For years, I had fed Ether data, refining its neural networks until it could predict disruptions with 98% accuracy. It was the only thing in this tower that was entirely, secretly mine. My father thought I was a phase, a temporary inconvenience he could silence until the ink was dry on his legacy. He didn't understand that I wasn't just a part of his empire. I was the architect of the only part of it that actually worked. Standing there in the silence of the penthouse, I didn't feel like a prisoner. I felt like a strategist. I was 30 years old. I had just been sent to my room, and I was about to show them exactly what happens when the ghost in the machine decides to walk out. I didn't cry. Crying is a biological release for people who have run out of options. And in the clinical silence of the penthouse, I had never felt more capable. I didn't ask why he did it, because the answer was written in the jagged geometry of my father's ego. To Robert Vance, I wasn't a partner or a scientist. I was a phase. A temporary glitch in his vision of a male-dominated dynasty. He thought he could hit a switch and dim my life until it suited him again. But he forgot one thing. I was the one who built the switches. I walked to my bedroom, past the champagne-colored dress my mother had left out for the signing ceremony, a uniform of surrender I had no intention of wearing. I reached into the back of my nightstand and pulled out my old e-reader. To a security sweep, it was an obsolete piece of plastic. To me, it was a digital skeleton key. My father had taken my laptop and my phone, thinking he'd disarmed me, but he was looking for a weapon in a drawer when the very walls of his empire were made of my code. My fingers didn't tremble as I entered the encrypted sequence. I watched the screen glow with the cold, familiar light of ether. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. I began the audit of Tyler's credentials. He had the title of Chief Financial Officer, but without my authorization, he was just a man with an expensive pen. I navigated to the master server for Project Artemis and began clicking revoke. One by one, I severed the threads connecting Tyler to the $38 billion prototype. I didn't feel anger. I felt the relief of a technician removing a faulty component from a delicate machine. As I worked, I realized the profound fragility of the man downstairs. Robert Vance operated on the illusion of power from an empty wallet. The illusion of power that comes from a full bank account, but a hollow character. He spent his life confusing having with being. He had the billions, the skyscraper, and the private jets, but his authority was a rented image. It was a suit he wore to hide the fact that he didn't understand the world he claimed to own. He thought he was the source of the light. But he was just the glass, and I was the electricity. His position was a shell. The moment the technology stopped responding to his name, his power would vanish like smoke. He didn't have the internal value to stand on his own 2 feet, once the pillars of my labor were pulled away. He was a landlord of a digital empire, who didn't know how to change a light bulb. User Tyler Vance, access terminated, the screen whispered. In that moment, the $38 billion contract became a collection of useless paper. The Artemis prototype was now a brick, a silent monument to Tyler's incompetence. I leaned back against the headboard, the glow of the e-reader illuminating the dark room. My father thought he had locked me in, but he had actually locked himself out. He wanted a fight. But I had given him an audit. This wasn't revenge. It was just accounting, and the Vance family was officially bankrupt of the only thing that mattered, the truth. I didn't reach for the landline. I knew it was dead before I even touched the receiver. Instead, I pulled out a burner phone I'd tucked into the lining of an old winter coat, months ago. A small, plastic precaution for the day the Vance unity finally shattered. I dialed a number I'd memorized during a time when everyone else in this tower was looking the other way. Lawrence answered on the second ring. His voice was the same as it had been 5 years ago. Steady, low, and laced with a debt that most people in our circle would have forgotten the moment the signature dried. But Lawrence wasn't most people. When my father tried to fire him for taking a 3-month medical leave for a heart condition, I didn't just intervene. I moved the entire legal department's budget around to make his position untouchable. I'd saved his career, and in the silence of my penthouse cell, that investment was finally ready to mature. "Mabel," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "The tower is vibrating. Your father is screaming about technical glitches. And Tyler is pacing the lobby like a caged animal." "What did you do?" "I just reclaimed my intellectual property, Lawrence," I replied, my voice reflecting the cold Chicago night outside. "The Artemis code doesn't recognize Tyler anymore. It's a foreign body. It's being rejected." There was a pause. I could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end. Lawrence wasn't just the family's head counsel. He was my eyes inside the vault. "I'm looking at the liability waivers for the Artemis signing tomorrow," he whispered. "Mabel, I've been through these files a dozen times, but now that the master encryption is flickering, I'm seeing layers that were hidden before." "What layers?" I asked, my internal monologue already running scenarios. "The signature mismatch," Lawrence said, and I could hear the genuine shock in his tone. "I'm looking at your digital signature on the Annex B waivers. The ones that state the lead architect takes full, personal legal responsibility for any clinical fatalities resulting from algorithmic failure." "Mabel, The metadata doesn't match your terminal. The realization didn't hit me like a wave, it hit me like a line of code finally resolving. My brother hadn't just ignored my warnings about the lethal flaw in his code, he had planned for them. He had forged my signature on the one document that would make me the fall girl for his incompetence. If Project Artemis went live and a patient died, I wouldn't just be out of a job, I'd be in a prison far less comfortable than this penthouse. He forged it, I stated. It wasn't a question, it was a forensic conclusion. Tyler used a legacy override from your father's office to bypass the verification, Lawrence confirmed. They didn't just want you silent, Mabel, they wanted you as a shield. They were going to sign a $38 billion deal on a foundation of your blood. Can you prove the forgery, Lawrence? I asked, my mind already pivoting to the boardroom. The metadata is clear now that Ether has pulled the master key, he replied. I have the logs. I have the proof of the override. Tyler left a digital footprint the size of a mountain because he never thought anyone would look. Hold the files, Lawrence. Don't say a word to my father. We're not just stopping a deal anymore, we're exposing a crime. I hung up and looked at the Chicago skyline. The city lights didn't look like a constellation anymore, they looked like a target. My brother wasn't just ungrateful. He was a criminal. My father wasn't just a tyrant, he was a co-conspirator in a $38 billion fraud. The conflict had moved from a family drama to a legal war, and for the first time in 30 years, I held the only weapon that mattered. I looked at the charcoal suit hanging on my door. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to the boardroom as a daughter. I was going as the architect of their destruction. The morning of the signing arrived with a heavy, gray Chicago sky that seemed to press against the glass of the penthouse like a warning. I stood in front of my closet, looking at the champagne-colored dress my mother had left for me. It was soft, expensive, and designed to make me blend into the background of my father's triumph. I touched the silk for a second, then pushed it aside. I reached for the charcoal black tailored suit I had bought for myself in Milan. It was sharp, architectural, and felt like armor. As I pulled the blazer over my shoulders, I wasn't just getting dressed. I was formalizing a declaration of war. The 2 security guards who came to get me didn't say a word. They didn't need to. The silence in the elevator was the sound of an empire holding its breath. When the doors opened on the executive floor, the air smelled of high-end espresso and the kind of frantic ambition that usually precedes a $38 billion mistake. I walked toward the boardroom, my heels striking the marble with the precision of a metronome. I could see the heads turning as I passed. People expected the broken daughter to be dragged in. They weren't prepared for the woman who looked like she already owned the building. The boardroom was a theater of hubris. The long obsidian table was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the faces of 12 international delegates and the entire Vance board. At the head of the table sat my father, Robert Vance, radiating the kind of controlled power that had made him a titan. To his right, Tyler was practically vibrating with smugness, a gold pen already hovering near the leather-bound contracts. They didn't even look up when I entered. To them, I was just a requirement for the family photo, a silent witness to their glory. I took a seat at the far end of the table, directly across from my father. The delegates were speaking in low, congratulatory tones about Project Artemis and the new era of bio-integrated technology. Robert stood up, his voice booming with the practiced warmth of a man who had spent 30 years selling a version of the truth. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about a future built on the Vance name. He didn't mention that the future he was describing was built on a lethal code error and a forged signature. Then came the moment. The lead delegate from the European consortium slid the contracts toward my father. "To a partnership that changes the world," the man said. Robert smiled, that predatory, billionaire smile, and looked at Tyler. "It's time," he said. Tyler reached for the documents, his eyes flickering toward me for a split second, a look of pure, vile triumph. He thought he had won. He thought the grounded girl had finally been brought to heel. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the celebratory murmur like a scalpel. "Don't sign that, Tyler." The room went dead silent. The delegates paused, their pens mid-air. My father's expression didn't just harden, it calcified. "Mabel," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "you were told to be silent. You are here, as a guest of this family. Sit back. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I looked past him at the board members, some of whom were already shifting in their seats. I am not here as a guest, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am here as the lead architect of the neural interface, and I am here to inform this board that the bioconduit has been severed. What are you talking about? Tyler snapped, his face flushing a deep, guilty red. The system is fine. It's just a minor glitch. It's not a glitch, Tyler, I replied, standing up slowly. It's an amputation. I have revoked all master credentials for the Artemis project. The AI, Ether, no longer recognizes Vance Bioconduit as a valid operator. You are attempting to sell $38 billion worth of inert hardware. The confusion in the room turned to a cold, sharp panic. My father looked at the delegates, then back at me. The vein in his temple pulsing with a fury I had never seen. He realized in that moment that I hadn't just rocked the boat, I had sunk it. The professional strike was complete. I had walked into their temple and pulled the pillars down, and all they had left were their gold pens and a contract for a ghost. Robert surged to his feet, the chair clattering against the glass wall behind him. Security! Get her out of here! He barked, but for the first time in 30 years, the room didn't scramble to obey him. The board members were frozen, their eyes darting between the empty $38 billion contract and my steady hands. They were no longer looking at my father as a leader, they were looking at him as a liability. I could see the exact moment the gravitational pull of the room shifted. They weren't shocked by the betrayal. They were shocked that the person they had considered a footnote was now the only one holding the table of contents. Tyler lunged for the master console embedded in the table. You're lying, he hissed, his fingers flying across the touch interface. I am the chief financial officer. I have the secondary override. He slammed his palm against the biometric scanner. The screen didn't glow green. It pulsed a rhythmic, clinical red. Access denied. Signature mismatch, the system whispered in a voice that was hauntingly similar to my own. I watched him, my expression unmoved. He looked like a child banging on a broken toy, a titan realizing his thunderbolts were made of plastic. It is no use, Tyler, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room. I built Ether to recognize truth, not titles. And the truth is, you haven't written a single line of functional code in over 3 years. Robert grabbed the console, his knuckles turning white. I am the chief executive officer of this company. This is my hardware. Override. Authorization Vance 01. The system stayed red. I leaned in, the obsidian table cool against my palms. Ether. Authenticate user Mabel Vance, I said. The room flooded with a soft blue light. Authenticated. Welcome back, Mabel, the artificial intelligence replied. The delegates gasped. The board members sat back, the realization hitting them like a physical blow. The empire wasn't Robert's, it was mine. That is when Lawrence stood up. He didn't look like a man afraid of his boss anymore. He looked like a man delivering a sentence. There is more, he said, sliding a tablet toward the board chair. We have performed a forensic audit of the liability waivers. The metadata shows a manual override from Tyler Vance's terminal. He forged Mabel's signature on documents that would have shifted all criminal negligence for the Artemis flaws onto her. Tyler's face went from a furious red to the color of ash. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the delegates, at the board, then at our father. But Robert wasn't looking at him. Robert was looking at the stock ticker on the wall. Vance Bioconduit was hemorrhaging value in real time. The rumors of the technical void had already hit the trade floor. This is a criminal matter, Irene Vance, the lead independent director, said. Her voice was as sharp as the suit I was wearing. Robert. Tyler. You are removed from your positions. Effective immediately. We are initiating a full internal fraud investigation. Robert's voice broke. It was a thin, high sound that didn't belong in this room. Mabel, please, think of the family name. I am thinking of the family name. Father, I replied. I am thinking of the thousands of patients who would have died because Tyler was too arrogant to admit he could not code. I am thinking of the truth. The lead delegate stood up, his face a mask of professional disgust. He didn't even say goodbye, he just walked out. His team following him, in a silent, synchronized retreat. The $38 billion walked out the door with them. I watched as the digital signatures were deleted from the screen. The $38 billion dream was shredded into a billion pieces of digital noise. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clean. The Vance name was no longer a crown. It was a warning. I walked out of the Vance Tower into the Chicago cold, finally free. The air didn't taste like steel anymore. It tasted like potential. I founded Ether Advisory, a firm dedicated to verifying medical ethics rather than hiding flaws. I wasn't destroying legacies anymore. I was building them on foundations that couldn't be forged. This was the justice of the sower. While my father and brother were focused on the punishment of the past, fighting over a name they had already hollowed out, I was focused on building a future. True justice isn't just about watching the wrong people fall, it's about making sure the right things are built in their place. My victory wasn't the collapse of Vance Bioconduit, it was the first time a patient walked again, using the perfected Artemis tech. A moment built on truth, not a signature mismatch. Thank you for watching. If you've ever had to find your own strength in a world that tried to make you small, let me know in the comments. Your truth matters. Share this, and subscribe for more stories of resilience.